Now, this is a segment that I am very excited to do. I don't know if you can tell, but I personally love the fact that there is trouble in San Francisco, and nothing makes me happier
Trouble
than
in paradise.
seeing that Brandon Ayuk. Nothing makes me happier than seeing that Brandon Ayuk is continuing to have issues coming to terms with the Niners, and this has been an ongoing saga pretty much since they lost the Super Bowl, about whether he'd be coming back, whether he'd be signing a contract extension with them or not. Um, we saw rumors about it with the draft, where they're drafting Ricky Pearsall, saying like, "Oh, is this their replacement for Aiyuk?" I feel like there's something in the news about him complaining once every like week or so, with him being so active as he is on social media. But I think we haven't really talked about it yet to this point. But I think this is an interesting point to jump in on the conversation just because of what he said recently. Um, he went on a podcast. He went on the Pivot podcast, and said, um, he was asked which uniform he thought he'd be wearing next season. He said, if you were to take a guess, probably a Niners uniform. He said, if not a Niners uniform, probably a Washington Commanders uniform. If not a Washington Commanders uniform, probably a Steelers uniform. And yeah, like you can see on the screen here, if you're watching on YouTube, he also said, I feel like right now I'm in the right place, in the right spot, with the right quarterback right now, but we're not on the right terms. So it's been very clear throughout this entire negotiation that he's not willing to back down from the number that he thinks he's worth. And it's very clear that the Niners don't necessarily agree with what he thinks he's worth. Or even if they do, they don't have the cap space for it, with a bunch of huge contracts either already on their books in guys like Trent Williams, Deebo Samuel, Nick Bosa, or with guys that will be coming due, number one being Brock Purdy in a year or two. Um, so, with that all being said,
Someday, there is a day at some point in the future where ESPN won't be able to use Purdy's amount of money as their go-to post on
wow, Purdy
Instagram.
still sleeps in his dorm room. Purdy's basically a peasant.
Purdy still lives with his
Isn't it
parents.
crazy?
Purdy can't
Yeah.
afford rent and lives off of like
Isn't it crazy that he's only
ramen
making
noodles
seven
at
hundred
eight
fifty
hundred
thousand
thousand
dollars a
dollars a
year?
year? Yeah.
Yeah,
Like,
it's all
God,
it's all ridiculous.
some of the people at ESPN would be surprised how I survive on the amount of money I make.
I know. Yeah. Um. Yeah. They
Like, God, how would
paint him out to
anybody
be like a.
how would anybody survive on that amount of money?
I know. But the way it's painted, it's like he is like scrounging for nickels outside Levi Stadium, and then by the time kickoff happens, he finds his way to the sideline and plays.
After each throw to the wide receiver, when they go to dap him up, he holds out like the tip thing, like 15, 18,
He's got like the
20%.
jar. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyways, he'll get paid. He'll get paid eventually, no matter how much they want to milk that story.
Don't worry, guys. You
I'll
won't
just
have to live in a peasant house for too much longer.
No. Anyways, how in terms of this Aiyuk news, I'll just kind of like leave it open. How much of it do you think is real, and how much of it do you think is just off-season smoke? Like, is he gonna be wearing a different uniform next year, or is this all just kind of like?
Truthfully, I have no clue. Like, it's so odd. This has been one of the years where, or this is the one of the few examples where, honestly, like, I don't know whether he's like doing all this stuff in the media to throw us all off his trail or something, or if he's just like trying to like throw us all over the place. I don't got a damn clue. I think it would be really interesting. I think he goes back to the 49ers if I were to give a prediction. I think it would be really funny if he left like to the Steelers or Commanders now after making that prediction. Like, I think it kind of, in a weird way, what he's doing right now kind of sets a new precedent for what players could do in the future.
Yeah.
A little surprised we haven't already seen it. Like, it feels weird that this is the first example of it, where a player's gone on a podcast and they've just been asked, where do you want to go? And he just goes, yeah, I like this team, I like this team, I like this team, I'd love to play with this guy. All that, right? Like, I'm surprised we don't see that more often, because at this point, with the access that players have, you're kind of like like to the internet. I mean, like, and the ability to just put stuff out there. It's kind of surprising that we haven't seen it, especially in a league like the NFL. Excuse me, where they just have so many different personalities. Like it's just, I don't know.
Yeah.
This feels like something that almost could have come sooner.
Yeah, and I agree. I think what he's doing, the way that I kind of described it in my head, is he's being a calculated diva. Like he's being what we're seeing from him isn't necessarily anything new in terms of like whining out on social media to say, "Oh, I'm not getting paid enough money. Boo hoo, I want my money." Like we've seen that from people before. Obviously, we see holdouts. We've seen players like it's a lot of the big wide receivers. I mean, like Antonio Brown is the one that comes to mind immediately,
Yeah.
where it's just like they'll lash out, they'll say anything that comes to mind. But it doesn't necessarily feel it doesn't feel like Aiyuk is doing the same thing, and I never necessarily thought of him as a diva before this. But it does feel like he's
I
kind of
would
using the
call it
personality more so
smart
as
business.
leverage.
Like, I actually don't think that anything that he's doing is like career ruining in any way.
No, not at all.
Because he's
That's why I said it's like
complimenting.
a calculated diva.
It's almost like he's doing what a lot of people would probably do when they're just looking for a job. They'd be like, when they forgot a few options, they'd just be talking to a company and just go, listen, I've got this contract offer over here, not contract, this offer to come join them, right over here. They're paying me a little bit more. Why should I join you? He's almost doing that, but in the public. Because why not? Because why you can. Like, it's the ability. Like when you're throwing it out into the world, all the Steelers fans out there just hold up. We could be getting Aiyuk, and are now going nuts. And now the Steelers GM is like, okay, now we kind of have to make this happen. When you're opening doors like this, it's the same thing that like half the insiders almost do in a weird way, where I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of players, their way of doing exactly what Aiyuk is doing right now is leaking stuff to insiders. It's almost the same thing. You are your own insider. So in a lot of ways, I think it's very clever. Like, I think it's pretty smart. But, yeah, I don't know how everybody else feels about it, I guess. Are people thinking that he's kind of being a diva?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've seen some stuff. I don't have it all off the top of my head. I remember it being like posting Instagram stories or something about him being like, "Nah, I ain't coming back" or something. I don't know. Like it's been a lot of stuff like that I would calculate as more being a diva, but I feel like as of recently, it is just kind of more leveraging than anything, and using.
Oh shoot!
Like I use social media. Here, I have this exact quote. So he posted a this is from that same article with the score. He posted a TikTok with Jaden Daniels talking about how the Niners don't want him back. And he then went on this podcast to explain, and he said, this is a direct quote, social media is a way for me and my team to leverage myself and what I'm trying to get, because that's the way for me to get the message out there and get the facts out there. And that's basically what we were saying. It is a very like diva-like behavior, but this is all intentional and this is all calculated. Whereas divas would, like Antonio Brown, would say similar things. It would be done in such a way that would be more damaging.
Yeah.
But
Antonio
really
Brown
is
doesn't have a team behind him, clearly trying to like.
No.
There's some things that he's doing that's very clearly like, you know, a little like the TikTok, for example, is like that wasn't necessary, right? Like that's not necessarily something that needed to be out in the world. Like it's not like you needed to go out there and say they didn't want me no more whilst doing whatever with like the team that does want you's quarterback. That might not have been necessary, but everything else that he's doing.
Well, I mean, it is all posturing though, right? Like, I mean, that surely does put pressure if you're John Lynch to say like he's clearly going out and making it clear what he wants. Like if we actually want him back, we're gonna have to get it done quickly, or else it's gonna get past the point of no return. I do think that it does put pressure on you if you're the GM, and I think if you're the player, that's always a good thing. in terms of if we want to talk a little bit more about the teams he mentioned, I think both fits are kind of interesting in their own unique ways. I think Commanders obviously talk about doing TikToks with Jaden Daniels. You develop some rapport there. I think that him complimenting Terry McLaurin would just be a dream for a rookie quarterback to go into.
Yeah.
And then I think with the Steelers, you just immediately find your Deontay Johnson replacement. And pairing him with George Pickens is another one where it's just like Aiyuk has the talent to be a number one, but sliding him in as a complementary piece to a pre-existing number one just like makes his talent all that much better. And I think I don't remember which podcast I heard this on, but someone was making the point of how hard it is for free agents, and even though he wouldn't be necessarily if he got traded away, um, how it's often difficult for a player if you're the number one, if you're the number two spot and you're a really good number two, and then you go to another team where they sign you to be the number one. It's so much of a different role that they often have a hard time adjusting, especially with the added pressure of having this huge contract. But having a player go from a number one to a number one, or from a number one to a number two, that transition often works out a lot better. And I think for Aiyuk, it would be the kind of thing where it's like a number one talent, but he doesn't, in both of those destinations, he doesn't necessarily have to be the number one. So I do like both of those spaces for him.
Yep, and I agree with all that. Like it's the type of thing where absolutely, as a rookie quarterback, you're bringing in a guy who's going to help out Jaden Daniels a ton. And I know there's been a lot of stuff coming out about a lot of hype for Daniels actually that we didn't necessarily see before the draft, with a lot of people very excited for what he could potentially do with the Commanders. You got to think that hype just goes up if they sign Aiyuk. Like, God, McLaurin and Aiyuk would be a fun wide receiver duo, absolutely. And I think the Commanders are already a team that they're not necessarily bad. Like, they've got a lot of good pieces, especially offensively now. They've got their quarterback, assumingly. Like, there's a lot of things to like, so I can see why he'd want to go there. Steelers are kind of a similar story. I don't know. Russell Wilson as the starting quarterback day one makes me question it a bit more, but it's the same type of thing where George Pickens and Aiyuk would also be a pretty fun duo. So as a whole, I like it a lot. I think either of those teams would be a lot better with Aiyuk. I still think the 49ers are the team that would probably make the most sense to stick around on, because they are the team that with Aiyuk would be the best. Neither the Commanders nor the Steelers would be a better team than the 49ers with Aiyuk.
Yeah, and it's true, but I think with everything we've seen from Aiyuk, it's not necessarily about that. I don't think, not to say that he doesn't care about winning, because I think every player in the NFL cares about winning, but it's clear that making money is his priority here. And especially with some of those teams, like particularly the Commanders, I think it's very clear in his head that if he is to stay with the Niners, he would have to give a bit of a discount. And he even in this podcast, he talked about not being willing to accept a hometown discount, and that kind of makes that impasse really clear. I do think this has kind of been one of the more interesting points of this discussion, and maybe we can wrap up on this. Is so the Niners are like any team of this caliber have a cap crunch incoming, and they have 2-star wide receivers, and they probably aren't going to be able to keep both. I have heard some conversations in some of the football podcast channels that I listen to that essentially the Niners are viewing it as an Aiyuk or Debo situation. Yeah. Either you extend Aiyuk, or you extend Aiyuk and trade Debo before he gets to his next contract extension, or you keep Debo and keep rolling with what you've got and let Aiyuk go. If you're John Lynch, who do you prioritize? Where would you go with this?
Probably Aiyuk. Aiyuk's younger. That's the big thing, right? I think the two players are honestly not that far apart skill-wise. They're both good at different things, obviously, but it's not like you lose one and you're hurting a lot more. So I think the big decision maker for me ends up being age. Because off the top of my head, I'm guessing Aiyuk is at least 2 or 3 years younger. So at least to me,
Aiyuk is. I can tell you.
that,
Aiyuk is 2 years younger.
yeah.
Aiyuk is 26. Debo is 28.
And not that Debo's anywhere near the end of his career. Like he's probably still got another 2 or 3 good years out of him, or in him. But Aiyuk has 4 at least, right? And you also got to talk about play style. Aiyuk is nowhere near the run after catch wide receiver that Debo is. That's where Debo obviously makes his money. And I think once you get after 30, the style of wide receiver Aiyuk is kind of translates better in a lot of ways. So at least to me, I like Aiyuk a lot more as a guy that you want to bring in and be that franchise guy if you're really going to compare the two. But that's not necessarily a shot at Debo either. I think if it has to be one or the other, I think it has to be Aiyuk, and I think that's kind of a no-brainer, at least to me.
Yeah. I don't necessarily. I agree with you in terms of picking Aiyuk over Debo in this situation. Not necessarily for the same reasons. I think it is important to say, like, well, obviously age is a factor. Obviously, Aiyuk is a lot younger. 28 years old as a receiver in the NFL, like, you still have quite a good time ahead of you. Like, I do have some questions in terms of how he plays, how Debo plays. Maybe that's a little bit shorter, but you have to think, like, if I'm not wrong, Debo was the same draft as DK,
Yeah.
and we still don't think, like, I still don't think of DK as being like an older receiver. Maybe I'm just getting old, but
That is a hilarious thought. I feel like DK is still a prospect.
I know. Like, you still remember him coming into the league. He might. I don't actually know how
He's
old
26.
he is. Same draft. I don't know if there's.
He's 26.
Okay.
So he's still younger.
Okay, so he's a lot younger coming into the league.
Yeah, he turns 27 every year. So there you go. But
okay. So there we go. But anyway, with Debo, like, you said, you think he's got 2 good years left in him. I think it's probably is more than that. I think he's probably got a full, like, contract, like, however, like I could see if they sign up for a 4-year contract, I could see him playing up to that for the full 4 years. I think after that is when it starts to get a little bit sketchy, but I do think that he'd be able to play that out. I would still pick Aiyuk over Debo because I think some of the points you made later on were really good. And just in terms of play style, where I think you're right that Aiyuk's play style translates better as he gets older. And I also think this Niners team, once they got CMC, well, having Debo, because they use Debo a lot, obviously run after catch, but a lot of the stuff he did in the backfield was super valuable for them. And when they didn't have as good of a running game, he almost was their running game.
yeah.
But with CMC, you don't need that anymore. And it's not to say you don't need Debo anymore, because I think he's still probably one of the most important parts of this team. But I do think that role that he was so good at isn't necessarily as important anymore. And the role that Aiyuk has, I think, can be a lot less easily replaced, in terms of just being a pure go up and get it deep ball anywhere, and not just deep ball, anywhere in the field type wide receiver. And the last point I think that you didn't make that I would say is a point towards keeping Aiyuk over Debo. If you let Aiyuk go, it's most likely going to be just a letting him go in free agency. If you let Debo doesn't hit free agency until 2026, you're probably going to get something for him. It may not be the big of a return as we think it'll be, but it's still going to be something significant. So if I'm the Niners, the way I want to play this perfectly is extending Aiyuk, sorry, and then trading Debo, getting value out of it, to trying to develop Ricky Pearsall, and just keeping this train rolling as long as you can. Because that's what we saw with the Patriots, where it was just like they were so good at timing when to cut loose on their guys and getting stuff back for it, developing prospects with their picks, and just keeping the cycle. I think if you're the Niners, that's what you got to aim for. And I think you can a lot more easily do that by cutting loose on Debo instead of cutting loose on Aiyuk.